सो हेलो एवरीवन। सो आज मैं कोई वांशन स्टोरी नहीं लेके आई हूँ। देखो, मुझे रिकॉर्ड करने का वक्त नहीं मिल रहा है, ऐसा मेरे को खाली घर नहीं मिल रहा है, ठीक है। खाली घर नहीं मिल रहा है, ठीक है। इसी के लिए मैं रिकॉर्ड नहीं कर पा रही हूँ। मुझे पता है मैंने पोस्ट में डाला है अपकमिंग वन शॉट, वो मैं रिकॉर्ड करूँगी, बट टाइम नहीं मिलता। एंड ये स्टोरी जो है ये डिफरेंट काइंड ऑफ स्टोरी है, बट मेरे ही बनाया हुआ है, यू कैन से, यू नो। बट बिकॉज ऑफ मेरे को रिकॉर्ड करने में नहीं बनेगा, इसको ट्रांसफर करने में ये राइटन स्टोरी है, ठीक है ना, रिटन स्टोरी। तो मैंने इसको एआई को भेज दिया कॉपी पेस्ट करके, एंड उसने सीधा रिपीट कर दिया पूरा। तो मैंने सोचा क्यों ना मैं यूट्यूब पे भी डाल दूँ जब तक के लिए टाइम पास के लिए, क्योंकि यू नो मेरा चैनल का नाम है फिक्शनल स्टोरी, तो फिक्शनल में सब कुछ आता है। डोंट वरी, मार्शल में मैं जल्दी से लाऊंगी जैसे ही मुझे वक्त मिलता है। इट डिपेंड्स ऑन जब मेरे को खाली वक्त मिलेगा, ठीक है। तो बहुत जल्दी मेरे को मिल जाएगा खाली वक्त, लगभग एक हफ्ता लगेगा। सो दैट्स व्हाई तुम लोग ये वाला स्टोरी सुन सकते हो जिसको जिसको। एंड इंग्लिश है यार, भारी भारी नहीं है, ठीक है ना। इंग्लिश तुम लोग यहाँ से सीख भी सकते हो। इतना नॉर्मल इंग्लिश इसमें यूज हुआ है ना, सच में तुम लोग हो सकता है इंग्लिश समझ आने लगी धीरे धीरे। दैट्स ऑल आई कैन से। सो गो ahead and hear if you want to. एंड या ये जीएल स्टोरी एंड 10 चैप्टर मैंने इसमें अपलोड किया। अभी बहुत सारा चैप्टर इसका वैसे तो, बट ठीक है, इसमें मैंने 10 चैप्टर तक अपलोड किया गर्ल्स। तो चलो भाई सुनो, कुछ तो कर ढालना होगा ना मेरे को चैनल पे, इसी के लिए।
The Shadow on the Shore. The site was a masterpiece of untouched nature, ancient trees, a whispering creek, and a silence so deep it felt holy. This was the land Luvia had purchased. A group of construction interns stood at the edge of the clearing, clutching rolled-up blueprints. They were young, fresh-faced, and nervous. Luvia didn't hire experts for this phase. She preferred beginners, believing they still had the capacity to learn empathy. "She's just living there?" one intern whispered, looking at the small cabin. "Yes," the lead intern replied. And Luvia was very clear. No shouting, no force. We explain, we offer help, and we wait. Luvia doesn't believe in breaking people. She believes in moving them. They all shivered. Even though Luvia was the kindest boss they had ever had, her name carried a weight that made their lungs feel tight. Her power wasn't a loud roar. It was the heavy, silent pressure of the ocean. The encounter with Eliza. As the interns approached the cabin, the door creaked open. Eliza stepped out. Under normal circumstances, Eliza was the definition of sweet. She had a soft voice and eyes that looked like they had never seen a day of malice. The intern spoke gently, explaining the situation, that the land was owned by Luvia's group and they needed to begin the survey. Eliza listened, her hands trembling slightly, but she didn't fight. She spoke with such sweet words that the interns felt guilty for even asking. "I understand," Eliza whispered, her voice like velvet. "I'll try to find a way." The interns left with empty hands. They couldn't force a girl that kind to leave. They walked back to the headquarters to report to Luvia. The breaking point, but the peace didn't last. A few days later, Eliza was forced to meet with her parents. It was a meeting she never wanted. The air in that room was thick, with old wounds and sharp tongues. By the time Eliza returned to her cabin in the woods, she wasn't the sweet girl anymore. She was a glass bottle filled with gasoline, waiting for a spark. When the interns returned that afternoon, hoping for a final answer, they found a different Eliza. "Miss Eliza? We have the paperwork for the relocation. Get out!" The scream shattered the silence of the forest. Eliza's face was flushed with a blind, uncontrollable rage. She didn't see the interns. She saw her parents. She saw every person who had ever pushed her. "I said, leave me alone. Do you think you can just take everything? Do you think I'm nothing?" She shouted until her throat was raw, hurling words that felt like stones. The interns backed away, faces pale, feeling a mix of sadness and genuine fear. They had never seen someone break so completely. Luvia decides to move. Back at the office, the interns sat in silence, shaken. Suddenly, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The door didn't slam. It opened with a slow, deliberate click. Luvia walked in. She didn't look angry. She wore a soft, elegant suit and a calm expression. She looked like a woman who would give you her last dollar, but the interns couldn't even look her in the eye. Her aura was a physical force, a reminder that she controlled everything within her sight. "She shouted?" Luvia asked. Her voice was low, melodic. "Yes, ma'am," the intern stammered. She was different, frustrated. "She's not moving." Luvia looked out the window toward the forest. A small, unreadable smile touched her lips. "Everyone has a breaking point. It seems she has reached hers. I will go myself. Alone, ma'am? Alone, Luvia replied. It's time I met the girl who refuses to move. Of silence. The drive to the edge of the nature reserve was silent. Luvia drove herself. She didn't need a driver, and she certainly didn't need bodyguards, despite the rumors that she employed hitmen. Her presence was a fortress in itself. As the tires of her black sedan crunched over the gravel path leading toward the forest, the birds seemed to stop singing. It wasn't that she was a monster. It was simply that the world felt small when she was in it. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly on the damp earth. The air smelled of pine and impending rain. Luvia adjusted her coat, her eyes scanning the small, weathered cabin tucked under the canopy of ancient oaks. Eliza, Luvia murmured to herself. The name felt soft. She walked toward the porch. This was the girl who had sent her interns back in tears. This was the sweet girl who had finally snapped. Luvia reached the door and knocked. 3 precise, even strikes. No answer. Luvia waited. She was a woman of infinite patience. She waited for 3 minutes, watching the way the shadows of the leaves danced on the wooden door. When she finally reached for the handle, she found it unlocked. The cabin was empty, but it wasn't just empty of people. It felt empty of soul. A cold cup of tea sat on the table. A chair was overturned. The scent of Eliza's lingering frustration was almost tangible in the air, mixed with a faint, floral perfume. Luvia walked to the small desk and saw a crumpled piece of paper, a letter from Eliza's parents. Luvia didn't need to read it to know the pain it contained. She felt the vibration of the room. Eliza hadn't just left, she had fled. She had run away from the pressure of the land, the pressure of her past, and the pressure of the powerful woman who was coming for her. You aren't here, Luvia whispered, her eyes dark and thoughtful. So where does a sweet girl go when she finally breaks? Chapter 2. The Neon Purgatory. In the heart of the city, miles away from the whispering trees, Eliza stood beneath a flickering neon sign. It was a bar called the Iron Lily. She had never been to a place like this. Her life had always been quiet, tucked away in nature, filled with sweet words and gentle manners. But tonight, the sweetness was gone. Her encounter with her parents had left a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. Her heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. She couldn't go back to the cabin. She couldn't be good Eliza anymore. She pushed the heavy velvet doors open. The air inside was thick, with the smell of expensive tobacco, aged whiskey, and the low hum of bass music that vibrated in the floorboards. Eliza felt small, but for the first time in her life, she didn't mind. She wanted to disappear into the noise. She walked to the bar, her movements slow and shaky. Every eye in the room seemed to track her. She looked out of place. Her sundress was slightly dusty from the forest, and her hair was windswept. She looked like a lost angel, who had accidentally fallen into a den of wolves. Something's wrong, Eliza said to the bartender. Her voice cracked. I don't care what it is. The bartender looked at her for a long moment, noting the raw redness in her eyes and the way her hands were clenched into fists. He poured a dark amber liquid into a glass. Eliza took a sip. It burned. It was a violent, searing heat that traveled down her throat and settled in her chest. She welcomed it. The burn was better than the hollowness she felt inside. She took another sip, and then another, letting the world around her start to blur. She didn't notice the man sitting in the corner booth, a man with sharp eyes and a jagged scar along his jaw. Luvia's rival. He watched Eliza with the clinical interest of a predator. He had seen Luvia's construction crew hovering around the nature site. He knew Luvia wanted that land. And now, here was the girl from the cabin, sitting alone in a dive bar, drowning her sorrows. Interesting, the rival whispered, signaled to his associates. The girl is out of her cage. Chapter 3. The Convergence. Back at the cabin, Luvia stood on the porch, looking at the tire tracks leading away from the property. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call the police. She didn't call her office. She called a number that wasn't saved in her contacts. Find her, Luvia said. No greeting was necessary. She's in the city. Look for the places where people go to forget who they are. She hung up and looked back at the forest. This land was hers. The contract was signed, but as she thought about the overturned chair and the sweet girl who had screamed at the world, Luvia felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Luvia knew what it was like to hate the world. She knew what it was like to have a father you wanted to erase from your memory. She knew that when a sweet person breaks, they become the most dangerous person in the room. She got back into her car and turned the ignition. The engine hummed, a low, predatory growl. Don't worry, Eliza, Luvia murmured as she shifted into gear. I'm coming to bring you back, but not because of the land. The hunt had begun. Not a hunt of malice, but a hunt of recognition. The powerful woman with the terrifying aura was heading toward the neon lights, toward the bar, and toward the rival, who had no idea what kind of hell he was about to invite into his life. The storm in the forest was over. The storm in the city was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Predator and the Protector. The air in the Iron Lily had grown heavy, thick with the scent of spilled gin and the desperation of late-night souls. Eliza sat slumped at the mahogany bar, her fingers tracing the condensation on her third glass. The sweet girl from the woods was gone, replaced by a shadow of herself. The alcohol had turned her frustration into a hazy, shimmering fog. Her head felt heavy, her thoughts moving like slow-motion ripples in a dark pond. She laughed softly to herself, a bitter, jagged sound. She had shouted. She had actually screamed at those people. The memory felt distant, like a scene from a movie she had watched a long time ago. She felt a strange sort of freedom in the numbness, a relief in finally being, quote, bad. Behind her, the shadows stirred. Kalen, Luvia's longest-standing rival, slid out of his booth. He was a man who smelled of expensive cologne and cheap intentions. He had spent years trying to find a crack in Luvia's armor, a way to bleed her empire dry. To him, people were just tools, and right now, Eliza looked like the perfect hammer to smash Luvia's plans. He approached the bar with a practiced, predatory grace. He didn't sit next to her. He leaned in close enough for Eliza to smell the smoke on his jacket. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on those pretty shoulders," Kalen said, his voice a smooth, dangerous silk. Eliza blinked slowly, turning her head. Her vision swam. "I'm just staying," she whispered, her words slurring. "I'm not moving. Nobody can make me move." "Of course not," Kalen cooed, a dark glint in his eyes. He signaled the bartender to put her tab on his card. "In fact, I think someone as special as you deserves a much better place to stay than a dusty cabin." "I have houses, Eliza. I have places where Luvia and her construction crews can never find you." He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm. "Why don't we get you out of here? You're far too drunk to be alone. Come with me, and we can talk about how to make Luvia pay for bothering you." Eliza's mind was a whirlpool. She didn't know who this man was, but he was offering a way out. He was offering a shield against the woman with the powerful aura. She started to reach for his hand, her spirit too tired to fight anymore. I should go," she murmured, swaying on the stool. Kalen's smile widened. He had her. He began to lead her toward the back exit, his grip tightening on her elbow. "That's it. Just a few steps." Suddenly, the heavy velvet doors of the bar didn't just open, they seemed to yield. The music didn't stop, but the energy in the room shifted so violently it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the building. The chatter died down to a low, panicked hum. The bartender stopped polishing a glass, his eyes widening. Luvia had arrived. She stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the streetlights outside. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She wasn't shouting. She simply stood there, her coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. The aura people whispered about, hit the room like a physical wave. It was cold, ancient, and absolute. Kalen froze. He was a powerful man, a man who had ordered deaths and stolen fortunes. But when Luvia's gaze locked onto his blood turned to ice. He saw the way her eyes dropped to his hand on Eliza's arm. Luvia took one step forward. Just one. The sound of her heel hitting the floor was like a gavel in a courtroom. "Kalen," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the bar. It was the sound of a blade sliding out of a sheath. "Take your hand off her." Kalen looked at Eliza, then back at Luvia. He knew the stories. He knew that Luvia didn't play by the rules of the boardrooms when she was truly crossed. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. He wasn't ready for a war tonight. Not here, and not over a girl he didn't understand yet. "Just being a gentleman, Luvia," Kalen hissed, his voice trembling despite his efforts. He didn't wait for her to respond. He let go of Eliza so fast it was as if she had burned him. He backed away, retreating into the shadows of the hallway toward the back exit. He disappeared into the night before Luvia could even reach the center of the room. Eliza, suddenly without support, stumbled. She felt herself falling, the world spinning into blackness. But the hard floor never hit her. Instead, she felt a pair of arms catch her. They were strong, steady, and smelled of expensive perfume and the fresh, cold air of the forest. Luvia held the drunken girl against her, looking down at the mess of Eliza's hair and her tear-stained face. The woman who everyone feared, the woman who never showed emotion, softened her grip just a fraction. Outside, hidden in the darkness of an alleyway across the street, Kalen watched through the glass window. He watched as Luvia, the most powerful woman in the city, carefully tucked a strand of hair behind the ear of a poor nobody girl. "Why?" Kalen whispered to the darkness, his heart still racing from the fear Luvia had inspired. "What is that girl to you, Luvia? Why would you leave your throne for a stray?" He pulled his phone out, his eyes narrowing. He didn't know the secret yet, but he knew one thing. Eliza was the key. And if Luvia cared for her, then Eliza was the perfect target. Inside, Luvia looked down at the unconscious Eliza. "You're a long way from your woods, little bird," Luvia whispered. "Let's go home." That was the beginning of their strange connection. The glass fortress and the midnight ghost. The gates to Luvia's estate opened with a silent, ghostly glide. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, sharp lines of glass and dark stone, nestled deep within a private valley where the city lights couldn't reach. It was a palace of shadows. Though every hallway was illuminated by soft, recessed lighting, the air inside was heavy with a profound, ringing silence. There were no maids. No guards stood in the foyers. Luvia lived here like a queen in a tomb, preferring the honesty of solitude over the noise of servants. She carried Eliza inside, the girl's weight negligible against her steady strength. Luvia laid her in a guest suite that overlooked a blackwater pool. The sheets were silk, cold, and gray. For a long hour, Luvia sat in a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, watching the rise and fall of Eliza's chest. Luvia's face was a mask of marble, unreadable and still. She was thinking of the way the rival had looked at Eliza, like a prize to be broken. Eventually, the silence of the house pulled Luvia toward her own quarters. She slept, but her sleep was never deep. It was the light rest of a predator. The midnight awakening. At 2 a.m., a sound shattered the stillness. It wasn't a scream or a crash. It was a laugh. Luvia's eyes snapped open. She was out of bed in an instant, her silk robe trailing behind her like a shadow as she moved down the hall toward Eliza's room. When she pushed the door open, the scene was not what she expected. Eliza wasn't sick, and she wasn't in pain. She was sitting in the middle of the vast, expensive rug, surrounded by the decorative pillows she had thrown off the bed. Her face was flushed pink, her eyes bright and glazed with the lingering heat of the alcohol. "The stars are inside the floor," Eliza whispered, her voice high and melodic, completely different from the raw, screaming woman in the forest. She was pointing at the small LED lights embedded in the baseboards. She looked up as Luvia entered. Eliza didn't see the hitman, or the terrifying CEO. In her drunken, regressed state, she saw something else. "Oh, you're the Moon Lady," Eliza chirped, her voice taking on a sweet, childish lilt. She scrambled to her feet, though she wobbled dangerously. "The Moon Lady came to play? It's so big here. Why is it so quiet? Are the ghosts sleeping?" Luvia stood frozen. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one dared to call her Moon Lady, or treat her home like a playground. "Eliza," Luvia said, her voice a low, commanding hum. "You need to lie down. You are unwell." "No," Eliza pouted, crossing her arms and sticking out her lower lip. She took a stumbling step toward Luvia and suddenly grabbed the sleeve of Luvia's expensive robe. "It's too cold. The bed is like an ice cube. And the trees are gone. I want my trees." Eliza's eyes suddenly filled with huge, shimmering tears. The childish joy vanished, replaced by a toddler's sudden, overwhelming sorrow. The bad men came to the trees. They had papers, big, scary papers. Calming the storm, Luvia felt a strange tug in her chest, a sensation she had spent a decade burying. She reached out, her long, elegant fingers hovering over Eliza's shoulder before finally settling there. "The papers are gone, Eliza," Luvia said softly. She realized that authority wouldn't work here. This version of Eliza needed a different kind of strength. "Promise?" Eliza sniffled, looking up with wide, trusting eyes. "I promise," Luvia replied. Eliza suddenly lunged forward, wrapping her arms around Luvia's waist. She tucked her head against Luvia's chest, humming a nonsensical tune. "You smell like the rain," she mumbled. "Don't go away. If you go away, the man with the fire eyes will come back." Luvia stiffened at the mention of the rival, her eyes darkening. She realized Eliza had felt the danger at the bar, even through the alcohol. With a sigh that sounded like the wind through the pines, Luvia did something she never did. She sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled Eliza beside her. She began to stroke Eliza's hair with a slow, rhythmic motion, the way one might calm a wounded animal. "The man with the fire eyes cannot enter this house," Luvia whispered into the dark. "Sing?" Eliza asked, her voice trailing off as her eyelids grew heavy. Luvia didn't sing. She didn't know how to be that soft. Instead, she began to recite the names of the trees on the nature plot, her voice a deep, steadying vibration that acted as a lullaby. Oak, cedar, willow, pine. Slowly, the childish tension left Eliza's body. Her breathing evened out, and she fell into a deep, genuine sleep, her hand still clutching the hem of Luvia's robe. Luvia didn't move. She stayed there in the lonely, expensive house, acting as an anchor for a girl she was supposed to be evicting. She looked out at the dark horizon, knowing that the train of the rival's ambition was already speeding toward them. For the first time in years, Luvia wasn't alone in her house. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Chapter 6. The morning after the storm. The sun did not burst into the room. It crept in, filtering through the heavy, charcoal-colored curtains of the guest suite. The light was pale and clinical, reflecting off the minimalist glass furniture. For Eliza, the transition from sleep to consciousness felt like climbing out of a deep, murky well. Her first sensation was a throbbing rhythm behind her eyes, the price of her first encounter with alcohol. Her second sensation, however, was far more confusing. She wasn't lying on a flat mattress. She was leaned against something firm yet soft, draped in a warmth that smelled of sandalwood and expensive, rain-washed stone. Eliza blinked, her eyelashes fluttering against a silk fabric. She realized her hand was tightly fisted around a robe. She followed the line of the arm upward, and her heart nearly stopped. She was tucked into the side of Luvia. The hitman of the corporate world, the woman whose name made grown men tremble, was sitting upright against the headboard, her head tilted slightly back. Luvia was awake. She had clearly been awake for a long time, but she hadn't moved. She was looking out the window at the morning mist, her expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. The realization, Eliza scrambled backward, her face turning a shade of crimson that clashed with the pale gray sheets. The movement sent a spike of pain through her head, and she groaned, clutching her temples. "Careful," Luvia said. Her voice was a low, mourning rasp, smooth and dangerous. "Gravity is not your friend today." Eliza's voice was dry. Memories began to flash in her mind like lightning strikes. The bar, the burning liquid, the man with the sharp eyes. And then, the moon lady. Eliza's eyes widened in horror. She remembered calling Luvia a moon lady. She remembered crying about scary papers and hugging Luvia like a lost child. The sweet, polite girl she was supposed to be had been replaced by a chaotic, drunken mess. "I am so sorry," Eliza whispered, pulling the covers up to her chin, her eyes darting around the massive, lonely room. "I didn't. I've never done that. The bar. The shouting. I don't know why I did that." Luvia finally turned her head. Her dark eyes locked onto Eliza's. There was no judgment in them, only an intense, analytical curiosity. "You did it because you were at your limit," Luvia said calmly. She stood up, her movements fluid and perfect, showing no signs of having stayed in one position all night to support Eliza. When people are forced to be sweet for too long, the bitterness eventually has to go somewhere. Yours went into a whiskey glass. Luvia walked toward a small silver tray on the dresser and brought back a glass of water and a small tablet. "Drink this. It will stop the world from spinning." The invisible contract. Eliza took the glass, her fingers trembling as they brushed against Luvia's. She felt that aura again, the heavy, magnetic pull of Luvia's presence. It was terrifying, yes, but after the nightmare of the night before, it also felt like a fortress. "Why did you bring me here?" Eliza asked softly after swallowing the medicine. "You want my land. You should have just left me there. It would have been easier to take it if I was, like that." Luvia walked to the window and pulled the curtain back completely, revealing the vast, empty grounds of her estate. "I don't need you to be like that to take what I want, Eliza," Luvia said, her back to the girl. "I brought you here because Kalen was going to take you, and Kalen does not want your land. He wants to use you to get to me." Eliza froze. "To get to you? But I'm nobody. I'm just a girl in a cabin." Luvia turned around, a ghost of a smile, sharp and cold, touching her lips. "You were a nobody until I went to meet you myself," Luvia said. "The moment the world saw me catch you in that bar, you became the most valuable piece on the board. You are no longer just a girl in a cabin, Eliza. You are a secret that everyone is going to try to whisper." Eliza looked down at her hands. The piece of her old life felt miles away, buried under the neon lights of the city and the shadows of this glass house. She looked up at Luvia, seeing the power and the loneliness that radiated from her. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "Now," Luvia said, walking toward the door, "you have breakfast, and then we decide how long you can stay in this house before the train I hear coming finally arrives at our door." As Luvia left the room, Eliza realized that while she'd escaped her parents and the interns, she had walked into something much deeper. She was in the heart of the hitman's lair, and for some reason, the hitman was protecting her. "Would you like the domestic shadow?" The guest suite felt like a beautiful cage. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. In the forest, silence was filled with the rustle of leaves and the snapping of twigs. Here, the silence was engineered. It was the sound of expensive insulation and thick glass. It was the sound of a woman who didn't want the world to hear her breathe. Eliza stood up, her head feeling lighter thanks to the medicine Luvia had provided. She caught her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked frayed. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes were wrinkled. But there was a new spark in her eyes. It was the spark of someone who had looked into the abyss of her own rage and survived. She walked to the door and eased it open. Part of her wanted to run. She could find a back exit, scale the fence, and disappear back into the city. She wanted her quiet life back. She wanted to pretend she had never met the woman with the moon-cold eyes. But as she stepped into the hallway, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She remembered the man at the bar, Kalen. She remembered the way he had looked at her, not as a person, but as a prize. She realized that if she stepped outside those gates alone, she was no longer a girl in the woods. She was prey. For the first time in her life, Eliza felt a strange, terrifying sense of security. Luvia was a hitman, a shadow, a force of nature, but she was also a shield. A shield Eliza had never had, not even from her own parents. The kitchen revelation. Eliza followed the faint, rhythmic sound of a knife hitting a wooden cutting board. She descended the grand staircase, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. The house felt even larger from the ground floor, a cathedral of glass and steel. She found the kitchen at the back of the house. It was a professional-grade space, all stainless steel and black granite. But what stopped Eliza in her tracks wasn't the decor. It was the woman standing in the center of it. Luvia was there. She had traded her structured suit for a simple, high-necked black sweater. Her hair was pulled back into a casual knot. And, most shockingly, she was holding a knife, expertly dicing fresh vegetables. A pan sizzled on the stove, releasing the aroma of garlic, butter, and herbs. Eliza stared, her mouth slightly open. You cook?" Luvia didn't look up, but the corner of her mouth quirked. "You find it surprising that I eat, Eliza? Or that I don't have a team of chefs to do it for me?" "Both," Eliza admitted, stepping cautiously into the room. "The stories, they say you don't do anything yourself. They say you just snap your fingers and things happen." "In the world of business, that is true," Luvia said, sliding the vegetables into the pan with a graceful flick of her wrist. "But I don't like strangers in my home, and I don't like people touching what I consume. Control is a habit, Eliza. I prefer to know exactly what is in my food, just as I prefer to know exactly who is in my house." She finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over Eliza. "Sit. You need to eat if you want your brain to function." The quiet tension. Eliza sat at the island, watching Luvia move. There was a lethal precision in the way she handled the kitchen tools. Even while making a simple omelet, she looked like she was conducting an orchestra or planning a takeover. Every movement was efficient. No energy was wasted. Luvia placed a plate in front of Eliza. It was perfect, simple, elegant, and hot. "I was going to leave," Eliza whispered, looking at the food instead of the woman. "I was thinking about how to get past your gates." Luvia leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. She didn't look angry. She looked bored, as if she had already predicted this conversation. "And why didn't you?" "Because I'm scared," Eliza said honestly. She looked up, her eyes searching Luvia's, not just of the man in the bar. "I'm scared because I don't know why you're being kind to me. Everyone wants something. My parents wanted my land. The rival wanted a weapon. What do you want?" Luvia was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the ticking of a clock somewhere in the vast living room. "I want the land, Eliza. That hasn't changed," Luvia said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant frequency. "But I have discovered that I also want to see what happens when a girl who spent her life being sweet finally decides to grow teeth. You aren't just a girl in a cabin anymore. You are a curiosity." Luvia leaned forward, her aura intensifying, pressing against Eliza like a physical weight. "You are safe here because I allow it, and you will stay here because you realize that the world outside is much hungrier than I am." Eliza picked up her fork, her hand steady now. She took a bite. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "I'm not a toy, Luvia," Eliza said, her voice regaining some of the fire from the night before. Luvia's eyes flashed with a dark, appreciative glint. "I know. Toys break too easily. I'm hoping you're made of something stronger." The guarded innocence. The morning air inside the glass house remained still, but the atmosphere had shifted. Eliza had finished her meal, but she hadn't moved from the stool. She was staring at a small ceramic sugar bowl on the counter, her finger tracing the pattern on the lid. Now that the adrenaline of her rebellion had faded and the alcohol was gone, she felt small again. Not the smallness of a victim, but the smallness of a child lost in a museum. Luvia watched her while sipping a cup of black coffee. She noticed the way Eliza's shoulders hunched, and the way she bit her lip whenever a bird fluttered past the window. "You're fidgeting," Luvia observed. Eliza jumped slightly, her hand dropping from the sugar bowl. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Do I just sit here? Am I a prisoner? Luvia set her cup down with a controlled clink. A prisoner is kept against their will for a crime. You are a guest being kept for your safety. However, I cannot leave you here alone today. Why not? You said the house is a fortress. The house is a fortress, Luvia agreed, her eyes narrowing. But Kalen is desperate. He saw me touch you. He saw me protect you. To a man like him, that makes you my greatest weakness. If he can't get through the gates, he will find a way to lure you out. He will use your parents, your past, or your guilt. Eliza looked down at her lap. The mention of her parents made her stomach turn. She knew Luvia was right. They would sell her out for a fraction of what that land was worth. So where am I going? Eliza asked. With me, Luvia said. To the office. The child inside. The transition from the house to Luvia's armored SUV was quick. Luvia moved with a sense of purpose that made Eliza feel like she was being swept up by a tidal wave. As they drove through the city, Eliza stared out the window. She had lived in the woods for so long that the towering skyscrapers and the rushing crowds looked like a different planet. Despite the danger, a part of her felt a spark of wonder. Look! Eliza suddenly whispered, her face pressing against the glass. The giant screen, is that a whale? Luvia glanced at the massive 3D billboard over the city square. It's an advertisement for an aquarium, Eliza. It looks real, Eliza murmured, her voice losing its edge and becoming soft, almost breathy. I wonder if it's lonely up there. Luvia didn't respond, but she watched Eliza's reflection in the glass. It was jarring. One moment, Eliza was a woman screaming in rage at the world, and the next, she was a girl wondering if a digital whale felt lonely. This was the sweetness people spoke of. It wasn't just a mask. It was a genuine, fragile innocence that had somehow survived a lifetime of pressure. The Tower of Power. When they arrived at the headquarters of Luvia's empire, the energy changed instantly. The building was a spire of black glass that seemed to pierce the clouds. As they stepped into the lobby, the air became thick with the weight of Luvia's presence. Every employee they passed froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Security guards bowed their heads in silent respect. Luvia walked through the lobby like a goddess walking through a temple, her heels echoing with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Eliza walked a half step behind her, her hand instinctively reaching out to grab the back of Luvia's blazer. She felt the eyes of hundreds of people on her. She heard the whispers. Who is she? Is that the girl from the site? Why is Luvia letting her touch her? They entered the private elevator. As the doors closed, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They're all terrified of you, Eliza whispered, looking at the floor numbers climbing rapidly. Fear is a useful tool, Eliza. It ensures that people do their jobs without the need for constant supervision, Luvia replied. But it's so cold, Eliza said, her voice small. She looked up at Luvia, her eyes wide and honest. Don't you ever get tired of everyone being afraid to breathe around you? Luvia looked at the girl. No one had ever asked her that. Most people were too busy trying to hide their own fear, to wonder if she was tired of it. I am used to the cold, Eliza, Luvia said, her voice unusually soft. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened to a massive penthouse office. It was filled with screens, maps, and a desk that looked like it was carved from a single block of obsidian. Sit there, Luvia commanded, pointing to a plush leather sofa in the corner. I have meetings. Do not leave this room. Do not answer the door. If you need anything, you tell me, and only me. Eliza nodded, scurrying over to the sofa. She looked like a small bird nesting in a giant's hand. As Luvia sat at her desk and began her day, firing people over the phone and moving millions of dollars with a few keystrokes, she kept her eyes on the corner of the room. She realized that having Eliza there changed the aura of the office. The cold, sharp edges of her world felt a little less jagged with the sweet girl watching the clouds from her window. But outside, in the car park across the street, a long-lens camera clicked. Kalen's men were watching. The train was no longer in the distance. It was pulling into the station. The Lion's Den. Luvia stood up from her desk, the silk of her suit whispering against the leather chair. She glanced at her watch, a thin, silver piece that kept time with surgical precision. I have a board meeting on the 42nd floor, Luvia said, her voice dropping into that professional low hum. She looked at Eliza, who was currently occupied by spinning a glass paperweight on the coffee table. It will take an hour. My security team is stationed at the outer doors, but no one is permitted to enter this inner sanctum. Stay here. If you are bored, there are books. If you are hungry, there is a console to call the kitchen. Eliza looked up, the glass paperweight catching the light and casting rainbows across her face. I'll be fine, Moon Lady. I'm good at being alone. Luvia paused at the door. The nickname still felt like a small electric shock to her system, but she didn't correct her. With one last lingering look at the sweet girl who looked so small in the vast dark office, Luvia stepped out. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut with the finality of a vault. The intruder. For 20 minutes, Eliza was content. She traced the patterns in the carpet and watched the clouds scrape against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But the peace was shattered when the unbreakable lock of the inner office buzzed. A woman strutted in before the door even fully opened. This was Lily, the manager of the interior design department. Lily was a woman who wore her ambition like a perfume, loud and overwhelming. She was dressed in a neon pink power suit, her heels clicking aggressively. Lily considered herself the queen of the creative floor, and often ignored protocol to show how essential she was to Luvia. Lily didn't look toward the sofa at first. She was busy checking her reflection in the glass of Luvia's desk. Luvia? I have the revised swatches for the hotel project. I know you said no interruptions, but for me, I'm sure you'll make an exception. She stopped. Her eyes finally landed on Eliza. Eliza sat frozen, her hand still resting on the paperweight. She looked messy, her hair wasn't styled, and she was wearing an oversized sweater that clearly wasn't designer. Lily's face twisted into a sneer. She didn't know about the girl from the woods. She only saw someone who didn't belong in a billion-dollar office. Who are you? Lily demanded, her voice sharp and nasal. And why are you sitting on the Italian leather? That sofa costs more than your life. Eliza stood up, her heart beginning to race. The sweet girl was trying to be polite, but the memory of her parents yelling made her knees shake. I'm waiting for Luvia. She told me to stay here. Luvia? Lily laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. You call her by her first name. You must be one of the new interns from the basement. Or perhaps a cleaning girl who got confused? Look at you. You're a mess. You're getting your commoner oils all over the furniture. The wrong target. Lily walked closer, invading Eliza's personal space. She was used to bullying the younger designers to get her way. Get up, Lily snapped, pointing toward the door. I have an actual appointment with the CEO's desk. Go find a broom or a filing cabinet to organize. You're an eyesore. If Luvia comes back and sees a little mouse like you in her chair, she'll have you thrown out of the window. I'm doing you a favor, sweetie. Eliza felt the heat rising in her chest. It was that same heat she felt in the forest. The pressure was building. She thought about how Luvia had treated her with a cold respect, and then she looked at this woman in the pink suit who was treating her like trash. I'm not a mouse, Eliza said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with the beginning of a storm. Excuse me? Lily pulled back, shocked. Do you know who I am? I am the head of design. I decide the color of the world Luvia lives in. You are nothing. Now move, before I call security to drag you out by those split ends. Lily reached out to grab Eliza's arm to pull her toward the door. It was the wrong move. Eliza's eyes snapped. The childish girl vanished. The girl who had screamed at the interns in the woods came back with a vengeance. She didn't let Lily touch her. She stepped forward, her aura suddenly flaring with a raw, untamed energy that mimicked Luvia's, but with more fire. Don't touch me, Eliza hissed. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was a serrated blade. I don't care about your designs. I don't care about your suit. Luvia told me to stay, and I am staying. If you want me moved, you go find her and you tell her. But until then, get out of my face, Lily gasped, stumbling back. She had never been spoken to like that, especially not by someone who looked so innocent. You little brat, Lily shrieked, her face turning a mottled red. You have no idea what's coming for you. Eliza didn't back down. She stood her ground in the center of the dark office, a small flickering flame in the middle of Luvia's cold empire. She realized then that being with Luvia was changing her. She wasn't just learning to be protected, she was learning how to bite back. Meanwhile, 40 floors down, Luvia sat in her meeting. She suddenly felt a strange tingle in the back of her mind, a sense that her little bird was currently sharpening her beak. Chapter 10. The Breaking Point. The tension in the penthouse office reached a fever pitch. Lily, humiliated by Eliza's sudden defiance, didn't retreat. Instead, her ego curdled into a cold, vengeful malice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her company radio, her eyes fixed on Eliza like a hawk on a rabbit. Security? No, I don't need security, Lily hissed into the device. I need the design floor juniors. Now. Bring the heavy samples. We have a stray in the CEO's office that needs a lesson in hierarchy. Within minutes, the heavy doors buzzed again. 3 more women, Lily's most loyal followers, all dressed in sharp, judgmental fashion, marched in. They surrounded Eliza, forming a tight circle of perfume and expensive fabric. "Look at her," Lily mocked, gesturing to Eliza's trembling hands. "She thinks because she's hiding in Luvia's office, she's special. She doesn't realize she's just a temporary distraction." The bullying grew physical, in small, cruel ways. One assistant accidentally bumped into Eliza, sent her stumbling back against the sofa. Another threw a heavy book of fabric swatches onto the coffee table right next to Eliza's hand, the loud thud making the girl jump. "You don't belong here," the assistant sneered. "You're a stain on the carpet. Why don't you go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of?" "Leave me alone," Eliza shouted, her voice breaking. She was snapping again, but this time she was outnumbered. She felt the walls closing in, the same way she felt when her parents cornered her in the kitchen back home. The sweet girl was disappearing, replaced by a panicked animal. "Or what?" Lily laughed, leaning in close, her breath smelling of peppermint and cruelty. "You're going to tell Luvia? Luvia doesn't care about you. She uses people like you for breakfast and throws the bones away. You're nothing but a—" Lily reached out to shove Eliza's shoulder, her hand ready to force the girl to the floor. The door didn't open. It didn't buzz. It simply ceased to be a barrier. The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it turned vacuum thin. The light from the windows seemed to dim as if the sun itself had bowed its head. The 4 women froze mid-laugh, their joints locking up as if they had been dipped in liquid nitrogen. Luvia was standing in the doorway. She didn't move. She didn't shout. She didn't even have an expression on her face. But the aura was no longer a shield. It was a weapon. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on the chests of Lily and her team, making it impossible for them to draw a full breath. Luvia's eyes traveled slowly, painfully slowly, from Lily's hand on Eliza's shoulder, down to the scattered books on the floor, and finally to Eliza's tear-streaked, furious face. The silence lasted for 10 agonizing seconds. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tectonic shift in the earth. "Lily," Luvia said. Her voice was a whisper, yet it sounded louder than a scream. "What is your hand doing?" Lily's face went from red to a ghostly, translucent white. Her hand dropped as if it had been struck. "Ma'am, she was, an intruder. I was just—" "You were touching," Luvia interrupted, her voice gaining a sharp, metallic edge. "Something that belongs to me." Luvia walked into the room. She didn't walk around the circle of women. They practically threw themselves out of her way to avoid her path. She stopped directly in front of Eliza. Luvia didn't look at the bullies. She kept her eyes on Eliza. With a slow, surprisingly gentle movement, she reached out and wiped a stray tear from Eliza's cheek with her thumb. "Did they hurt you?" Luvia asked. Eliza shook her head, her breath coming in jagged gasps. "No. I fought back. I tried." "I know," Luvia murmured. Then, she turned her head just a fraction to look at Lily. Lily was shaking so hard her heels were clicking against the floor. "Ma'am, please. I didn't know she was yours. I thought she was a—" "You thought," Luvia said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "That was your first mistake. Your second was bringing the noise of the world into my sanctuary." Luvia reached for her desk phone without looking at it. She pressed a single button. "Security," Luvia said into the line. "I have 4 pieces of trash in my office. Remove them, not from the building. From the payroll, permanently, and make sure every firm in this city knows why." "Luvia, please," Lily wailed, falling to her knees. Luvia didn't even blink. "Get out before I decide that a firing isn't a sufficient enough punishment for touching what is mine." The security team burst in, dragging the sobbing women out. The doors clicked shut, and once again, the office was silent. Eliza looked at Luvia, her heart still hammering. You fired them all?" "Just for me?" Luvia turned back to her, her terrifying aura retracting, leaving only the cold, steady strength. "I didn't fire them for you, Eliza. I fired them because they forgot who was in charge of this world, and because you are the only person in this building permitted to make noise in my presence." Luvia sat back down at her desk as if nothing had happened. "Now, sit. We have work to do. And the train I mentioned? It just got a lot closer."